hello to all Cinemaster lovers.
I will not harm.
Hope you enjoy watching. Let's get started. At midnight, the story began with a young girl lost in her thoughts, her heart burdened with an inexplicable feeling beyond anything human. From her lips came a desperate call into the darkness, as if she were summoning a shadow to respond. The shadow did hear her, and a faint whisper broke the silence of the night. The strange sound was inhuman, announcing its presence after a long slumber. Behind the curtain, under the dim moonlight, a tall figure emerged, a terrifying creature confirming to Eileen that she did not belong to the world around her, and that the people surrounding her were not of her kind. It was as if the creature was revealing her fate, asking if she wanted to stay with him forever. Without hesitation, Eileen, who was fleeing her inner void, agreed. The moment she did, she felt an indescribable sensation, like a shiver coursing through her veins. But when her eyes met the creature's face, the feeling turned into immense pain, as if a part of her soul had been torn away. Years passed, and suddenly, Eileen woke up startled from her sleep, drenched and screaming her husband Thomas's name. He tried to comfort her as she recounted the horrifying nightmare, clinging to his words as if holding onto a lifeline. He asked her to try to forget the dream. Eileen spoke about their honeymoon mansion, and Thomas promised her he would return soon. They were in Germany in the year 1838. The air was filled with the sounds of horses, people talking, and faint lights casting long shadows on the walls. Thomas hurried through the streets until he reached a real estate agency. The manager, Herr Nock, greeted him without scolding him for being late. Thomas thanked him for the opportunity, especially now that he had greater responsibilities after marriage. Herr Nock responded in an unsettling manner, as Thomas was not used to mixing his work with his personal life. Thomas assured him of his dedication to his job. The manager mentioned a deal with a foreign count, a descendant of an old family, who wanted to buy an old castle in the city to live out his remaining days in peace. The castle was in ruins, but the count was adamant and willing to pay a large sum. Thomas was tasked with traveling east to meet the count and finalize the contract. Although the journey was somewhat inconvenient, Thomas knew it was important to prove his worth at work. When Thomas returned home, he told Eileen he would be traveling for 6 weeks and that everything was arranged. She gazed at a bouquet of flowers and asked him not to leave her, trying to share her recurring nightmare. But Thomas, recalling the doctor's advice, asked her to forget such things. Eileen then described a dream where she saw a new wedding, and when she approached the pool, she realized her husband was not there. It was death itself. Despite the sorrow in her heart, she felt a strange happiness in the dream. Deeply moved, Thomas embraced her and promised to return safely and fulfill all her wishes. That night, they went out with Friedrich, Thomas's close friend. Amid laughter and tension, Friedrich shared that he was expecting his third child. Everyone raised their glasses in a toast of pride. In a fleeting moment of joy, Thomas said that he and Eileen would have children once their circumstances improved. He promised to repay the money Friedrich had lent him. Meanwhile, Eileen would stay at Friedrich's house while Thomas was away. After some pleasant conversation, Friedrich went to put his children to bed. Thomas apologized to Eileen for the upcoming period of separation. Later that night, as Thomas slept, Eileen carefully cut a lock of her hair, as if afraid to disturb a sacred moment, and placed it in a precious box, wanting to preserve the essence of their love. Elsewhere, Herr Nock performed a sinister ritual, writing words in his own blood and declaring his allegiance to his master. On the day of the journey, Eileen's heart was filled with pride and hope. She asked Thomas to return safely, reminding him to send her letters every day. She gave him the box containing her lock of hair, renewing their vow of love and emphasizing that their sacrifices were for a better future. Thomas left amidst the cheers of village children, with music and dancing as if the entire village were celebrating his departure. However, the joyful atmosphere turned sour when a group of people mocked some others and drove them away. Thomas, not wanting trouble, decided to spend the night at an inn before continuing his journey to Castle Orlok. The innkeeper spoke curtly, warning him not to mention the castle's name. When Thomas revealed he was going to meet Count Orlok, the villagers grew uneasy, urging him to return home. He had to pay double the usual rate to stay there. Before retiring to his room, an old woman warned him in a terrifying tone not to approach the castle, fearing even its shadow, as the horrors. Зрение, боязнь даже его тени, как ужасы внутри могли запереть его без выхода. At midnight, Thomas woke up in fright. From his window, he saw a group of men carrying a woman on horseback, claiming they were purifying her soul. The scene was strange and terrifying, as they took her to a grave surrounded by a demonic aura. Thomas could do nothing but shout at them to stop. They noticed him, but in that moment, Thomas snapped out of it, finding himself disoriented and muddy, as if he he'd been outside. The next morning, he found the streets empty and his horse missing. With no other choice, he continued on foot through desolate paths. Night fell as he traveled, and suddenly, a carriage emerged from the fog, racing madly before stopping abruptly in front of him. No one stepped out to assist him, but he felt the carriage would take him to Castle Orlok, so he climbed in, resigned. The carriage sped unnaturally fast, suffocating him. Along the way, he felt pressure on his chest, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The path grew increasingly grim, with twisted trees resembling skeletal ghosts. Finally, the carriage passed through a cracked gate, marking the entrance to the castle. As he disembarked, he saw a crumbling castle with cracked walls and dim lights. The doors slammed shut behind him with a loud bang. A strange, unnatural voice addressed him. It was the Count, reprimanding him for being late and informing him that midnight had passed and the servants were asleep. Thomas tried to explain, and they walked together until they reached an upper floor illuminated by the flickering light of a large fireplace. In the trembling light, Orlok asked him to place his bag down and sign the contract immediately. Thomas suggested waiting until morning, but the Count vehemently rejected the idea, and he says to him, "Call me sir." Out of respect, the Count's agitation increases, and Thomas feels a pressure in the air, as if there are many unseen eyes watching him. Then Orlok fills a glass with a dark drink, marks it with his long claws, and hands it to Thomas. Thomas takes a small sip, terrified, his eyes fixed on the Count's face, which resembles death to the extent that a shiver runs through his body. Trying to distract himself, he talks about the customs of the region, mentioning that he saw people who died in the birch forest. Orlok falls silent with a slight smirk, saying, "Those are just myths. Don't believe them, young educated man." But Thomas recounts the terrifying weather he witnessed and how there was a corpse. At that moment, the Count lets out a terrifying scream. Then, with a wave of his hand, Orlok admits he wants to escape to a modern city where no one knows these legends. He insists again that Thomas eat, raising his glass as if forcing a toast. The young man trembles and cuts a small piece for himself, but accidentally cuts his finger. Thomas says it's not a big deal, but Orlok frowns and tells him coldly that he must help him treat the wound. Thomas's eyes fill with tears as he hears the Count's orders and approaches the fireplace. There, he sees stones carved into idol-like shapes, imagining they move and bow their heads with a faint rustling sound. Meanwhile, in the city, Anna, Friedrich, and the children are walking under a warm sun, a stark contrast to the gloomy atmosphere of the castle. Eileen asks if they've ever felt like wooden puppets controlled by someone else's hand, without their own will. Anna replies that everyone feels at times like they're not in control of their life, but Eileen feels a deeper emptiness, as if something is chasing her, perhaps her own destiny. Then she apologizes, saying she's talking like a madwoman, admitting that without Thomas, she feels lost. Back at the castle, Thomas wakes up to find himself lying on the floor. He begins wandering through empty corridors, his voice echoing and freezing him with fear. There is no one around, not even the servants. Suddenly, he notices bite marks on his chest, his mind clouded with unclear memories. Orlok forces him to sign a contract in an ancient language. Before signing, the Count focuses on a box containing a picture of Eileen, commenting on how lucky Thomas is to have found such love. Afterward, the Count gives him a bag of money as a commission and hurries him to sign. When the deal is done, Orlok sees Thomas wanting to leave but asks him to stay a little longer because he looks tired, warning that traveling in such a state could be dangerous. Thomas objects, but Orlok walks away, taking the precious box with him. Feeling hopeless, Thomas tries to find an exit but discovers all the doors are firmly locked. While searching, he finds a passage leading to the castle's basement, where he discovers a coffin engraved with ancient symbols. When he opens it, he finds the decaying corpse of the Count. Shocked, he realizes that Orlok is a vampire, drinking blood. Thomas attempts to confront and kill him, but Orlok awakens, his eyes filled, a component placement, but Orlok awakens, his eyes filled with rage, and chases him. Thomas is paralyzed with fear, but manages to escape. The Count stops and recalls the woman who had previously said she would join him, looking at a lock of hair in the box. He declares loudly that Thomas is doomed and that Eileen will only see him in her dreams from now on. Miles away, Eileen feels a strange force pulling her and begins walking aimlessly at night. Meanwhile, at the castle, Thomas is torn between his intense fear and a strange admiration for the Count's character, as his image begins to intertwine in his mind with that of his wife. Days pass at the Harding family home, and Friedrich begins searching for a doctor after noticing Eileen moving in her sleep without being aware of it. The doctor considers several possibilities, advising Friedrich not to distress Eileen further and suggesting that if there's no improvement, they might have to restrain her to prevent her from harming herself. Before leaving, the doctor hears Eileen's voice, which unsettles him, prompting him to increase her sedative dosage. At the same time, Thomas is in a state of extreme terror, seeing ghosts and strange apparitions haunting him. In a desperate move, he decides to throw himself off a cliff into the sea. As he drowns, Eileen's condition worsens, with no news about her husband reaching her, and she's unable to visit the real estate agency alone. She relies on Friedrich, who promises to find someone to help her if Orlok doesn't respond. Anna pleads with him to be kinder to Eileen, but he's unconvinced and doesn't want to fuel her delusions, exhausted by the pressure he's under. He plans to call the doctor again, but is shocked to hear Eileen screaming by the river, behaving strangely and frighteningly. In another part of the city, the doctor receives news about a patient locked in an abandoned ward of the hospital, known for his savage and violent behavior, constantly shouting. The patient turns out to be Orlok himself, claiming he holds people's souls in his hands. He strangles animals, eats them, and freezes women, declaring he's here to spread curses and walk over the city's corpses. Suddenly, Orlok attacks the doctor, and none of the guards can stop him. At the same moment, Eileen experiences strange seizures. After the doctor contacts Friedrich, he discovers how obsessed Orlok is with his worship of evil, repeatedly saying, "He is coming," increasing Friedrich's worry about Thomas's disappearance. Coincidentally, a woman finds Thomas unconscious in the river. With the help of some nuns, she rescues him, bringing him to a safe place. When the doctor treating Friedrich hears about this, he suggests consulting someone from Switzerland who specializes in rare phenomena, but warns them that this man was expelled from the university due to his obsession with mysterious secrets. The nuns use incense to revive Thomas, who wakes up terrified, screaming Orlok's name. The nuns exchange concerned glances, saying the devil wants to destroy his soul and turn him into a mere shadow. Thomas's mind is consumed with Eileen, desperate to return to her, but the nuns advise him to stay in the church where evil cannot enter. They explain that the count is bound to his cursed land, making him difficult to defeat. Thomas senses that Orlok is on a ship heading to his homeland, pursuing him because he wants to reach Eileen and merge his fate with hers forever in a diabolical manner, carrying the Count's curse and an army of plague-carrying rats. Orlok is deeply longing to reach Eileen, to bind his fate to hers in a strange and unnatural immortality. Meanwhile, Friedrich and another doctor visit Professor von Frani, the Swiss scholar who lives surrounded by chemical experiments. He is delighted to see the ancient manuscript, but as soon as he hears about Eileen's story, his face darkens, revealing that he knows all the details. He asks them to untie her bindings and begins treating her with great respect, seeing her not as mad, but as a victim of incomprehensible forces. Eileen admits that since childhood, she has had visions, some of which came true, like her mother's death. And she also talked about night, when she felt a new sense of loneliness. So she called out for anyone to share that loneliness with her. Then, she felt the presence of something terrifying. Her father found her naked in the garden and accused her of wrongdoing. This left her with an overwhelming fear she couldn't get rid of. But when she met Thomas, she felt like he saved her from all of that, until the nightmares returned stronger than before. He saw how weak Eileen had become, as if her blood had been drained. The doctor confirmed that her pupils were abnormally dilated. He used a long needle and tried to prick her body to see her reaction to the pain, but her reaction was unnatural. He asked her what she was seeing. Eileen whispered about an endless night and said, "He is coming." Then her body began convulsing in strange spasms, her back arching in a terrifying way. Suddenly, she predicted a future filled with blood in the city. Fear filled the room, and everyone was terrified. After this episode, von Fran confirmed his worst suspicions, that there might be a demonic entity connected to Eileen. The Harding family couldn't accept this idea, but the doctor insisted there was no medical explanation for what was happening. He confirmed that such entities might choose specific souls and that Eileen was in unimaginable danger. He also requested that they stop giving her sedatives. On the ship, the sailors were terrified, throwing corpses into the sea, claiming that the dark cargo was the cause of the plague spreading. One of the sailors went down to inspect the coffin but was attacked by a massive swarm of infected rats. When he tried to escape, he felt claws gripping him. He screamed and broke free. Meanwhile, someone still trapped in another place began vomiting a white substance, attacked the guard, bit him, and then escaped, running through the streets screaming, "My master is coming," spreading panic among the people. The ship approached the harbor, and Eileen felt this inside her, accompanied by a vague sense of foreboding. She found Thomas collapsing from exhaustion, and they hugged, both happy to finally meet again. Thomas, while weak, told her he still kept her small box containing a lock of her hair. That same night, guards came to Friedrich's door to inform him that the incoming ship, filled with the plague, had reached the city. Herr Knock brought someone along to show the mansion he had purchased in the city center. The Bloodfounder stated that he needed Thomas to remain alive. Knock asked if they could kill him, but Orlok wanted to wait. When Knock mentioned Eileen, Orlok said he wanted her willingly, without pressure. Knock persisted, which angered Orlok, who struck him. Orlok held the small box as a symbol of his desire for Eileen. The plague spread rapidly, and the rats carrying the disease spread everywhere. Eileen cared for Thomas, who was slowly recovering. She apologized to Anne for the trouble she had caused them, and was happy that Thomas was improving, even if just a little. Doctors examined the body of a sailor from the ship and found bite marks and a complete absence of blood. Von Fran realized the catastrophe was immense and urged the townspeople to pray. He set out to find Knock, learning that he had escaped, which increased the anxiety. Von Fran asked Cersei and the Harding family to come to his home late at night, convinced that darkness was descending on the city with Orlok. Thomas tried to sleep but felt a suffocating sense of terror. After waking up, he decided to distance himself from Eileen, fearing he might harm her or she might harm him. Later, I put the children to bed and went to meet Eileen, who asked to sleep in her room. Friedrich, exhausted and frustrated by everything happening, couldn't find a logical explanation for any of it. But Von Fran was adamant that they were facing a real danger, that they were confronting death itself. Friedrich, overwhelmed by exhaustion and frustration, didn't believe in such supernatural things, but the doctor warned him, saying he needed to acknowledge the evil to fight it. Through his research, he discovered they were dealing with a vampire named Nosferatu, who had brought the plague with him. At midnight, Eileen woke suddenly and heard a sound behind her. She opened the window, and when she turned, she found Count Orlok standing there, staring at her with dark eyes. She accused him of defiling her body with his presence. He replied that this was part of the bond between them, but her love for Thomas made her refuse to surrender to him. Orlok insisted that she was not human like the others, but she denied it. The Count began to speak of the eternal darkness he had lived in since she called out to him that night, awakening him from the grave. He said it had become an endless torment binding their fates. He told her that Thomas had signed a contract selling her in exchange for a bit of gold. Eileen refused to believe this, convinced that Thomas would never do such a thing. But Orlok continued, saying he didn't know how to love. He recalled a night they had spent together long ago, but Eileen cursed him in anger. Furious, he struck her, and she fell to the ground. He began insulting her, declaring himself her worst enemy. He threatened that she had 3 nights to accept him, or he would come for Thomas and destroy her world until she returned to him for protection. Eileen woke suddenly from her nightmare. When she opened her eyes, she found herself lying on the ground, surrounded by infected vomit. The hospital was so full that there was no room for more patients. The doctor feared that no matter how much they tried to calm the situation or organize it, they wouldn't be able to control the epidemic. Изрение, они не смогут контролировать эпидемию. The delirious woman spoke of the smell of rotting corpses and the weakness consuming her. She claimed that the fetus in her womb was eating her alive. Friedrich tried to comfort her, but she felt as though her very soul had become a ghost. Eileen tried to convince Friedrich that the evil was vast and loved no one. He was worried about them and told Thomas and Eileen to leave the house to avoid infection. Eileen pleaded with him to understand that Thomas was still weak, but Friedrich told her he would pray for them. Eileen knelt before him, begging him to understand that this danger threatened every living soul. Friedrich became upset, feeling accused of the worst. He said he had carried the burden alone for months. Meanwhile, the doctors searched for Knock, who had made a pact with the deadly shadow. In Knock's office, they found a corpse and papers with strange symbols. Von Fran began trying to decipher the codes. After a while, everyone returned home. Thomas, still weak, followed Eileen silently. Von Fran intended to visit them, but discovered that Friedrich had expelled them. Friedrich, with tears in his eyes, asked Von Fran how to kill this devil. The doctor admitted he had never fought Nosferatu himself before, and that the methods varied according to legends. But he mentioned one certain way, to return him to his grave before the rooster crowed. Friedrich became enraged and dismissed the doctors from his home, deciding to face the plague alone. Now he returned to find out she had married. Eileen blamed Thomas for not writing to her from the castle, and suspected he had abandoned her. She told him about the agreement Orlok claimed Thomas had signed and asked about the money that was supposed to secure their future. And Thomas was confused, and Eileen was blaming herself for getting married. She began writhing in pain. Her body and eyes turned. Thomas got scared and ran to get help. But suddenly, she stood up all at once and started crawling towards him, mumbling difficult words. She said, "You will never satisfy me like Count did in her dreams." Anger and helplessness filled Thomas's heart. Von Fran was continuing his research in ancient books, searching for a way to banish the creature. He concluded that the woman must share his bed and confess her love to him before the rooster crows. This sacrifice would break the curse and rid the town of the plague. Von Fran also discovered that her fate was tragic. Midnight was approaching, and in Harding's house, the screams of Friedrich's daughters echoed. Anna tried to wake him, but he didn't respond. A terrifying scene unfolded as Orlok drank the blood of the girls and her own blood as well. She didn't care about the child in her womb. The loss was devastating. At the funeral, Friedrich was drowning in sorrow, standing stiff-faced from excessive crying beside Von Fran, who asked to speak to her alone. Friedrich blamed her, saying she was the cause of all this with her carelessness, but Von Fran pointed to the bite mark on his chest as proof that the matter was real and not a myth. Everyone gathered gathered to discuss how to get rid of the vampire before it was too late. In a moment of calm, Friedrich apologized, and they agreed to act immediately to purify the land and destroy Orlok's coffin, attacking him when he was unaware. If the plan failed, she knew she would have to sacrifice herself. She was aware that the universe was shaken by her. Von Fran was upset that there was no other solution, but she said she didn't need anyone's forgiveness because she had committed no sin. The doctor emphasized that her sacrifice would save everyone and asked her not to let Thomas be put in danger. In the end, they agreed that Von Fran would deceive Thomas so he wouldn't stop the plan. Eileen asked Thomas to promise her that he wouldn't return to her until he had dealt with Orlok. Thomas was anxious about Friedrich's triumph. He searched for him and found him at the cemetery beside his wife and daughters. He opened his wife's grave and gave her one last kiss, then died beside her from the intensity of his grief. Thomas and everyone else were shocked, so they decided to burn the corpses. Afterward, they headed to Orlok's castle. Inside, Orlok announced that the third night had arrived. Eileen, dressed like a ghostly bride, stood in her room's window inviting Orlok to enter. Thomas and his companions moved through a corridor filled with dust until they reached what they thought was Orlok's coffin. When they opened it, they discovered they had mistakenly killed Harnack. Von Fran tried to fix the situation by setting the room on fire, but Thomas became confused and rushed to save Eileen. He was upset with the doctor for deceiving him into thinking Orlok was in the castle. Without thinking, he ran to his house as the fire consumed the castle behind him. In the bedroom, she waited calmly. Orlok appeared as a distorted shadow, asking her if she was ready to come closer willingly. She nodded in agreement, sealing the cursed pact that bound their fates together. The ritual concluded with a kiss in a bloody ceremony. Suddenly, Thomas burst into the room and tried to stop what was happening. But with the crowing of the rooster and the first ray of daylight, Orlok screamed in agony. His eyes began to bleed before he collapsed and died in pain. Thomas held Eileen in her final moments, watching her disappear before him due to the sacrifice she made. The morning light revealed Eileen's ultimate surrender, bearing witness to the sacrifices that saved everything. And that's the end of our film today. If you enjoyed today's video, give it a like and subscribe to see our upcoming summaries. See you in the next video. Goodbye.